here we are, another video for the channel, and this time it is my unpopular opinion. So obviously if you had seen Adam's one, he did a video on the beach scene from Doomsday and how he said, well, I'm not going to tell you what he said, but he had some harsh words to say about that scene. Well, not too harsh, but it was okay. And I thought that I should do my own video for an unpopular opinion. Just letting you know, I'm filming this at the gym because the schedule for this advent calendar has been so crazy that I do not have any time to film this outside of my scheduled hours of work and gym and all sorts. So I'm multitasking here, and this might be possibly the craziest video in the history of this channel, and I wonder, well, not wonder, I just hope that I don't ever have to do this again, because this is fucking weird. But yeah, one way or another I am finding a way to deliver videos to you guys, even if it's on a running machine. Anyway, so better get on with it now. Right, my unpopular opinion. Now, I was really struggling with this because my opinions on Doctor Who are interesting because it's like I have explored a lot more areas of the show than a lot of the general public have. So I've watched a lot of like missing episodes from the 60s and whatnot. I've listened to some Big Finish. I have a real interest for experimental stuff. And a lot of the time I like to go way beyond the usual for what people tend to look for in the show. Because most people tend to just stick with the new series because it's new and it's fresh and easy to access. And I get that. But it's strange because my opinions on the show, even with all that, tends to not necessarily fall out of line necessarily with the mainstream, because I tend to like a lot of the episodes that the general public do. I tend to like a lot of the Doctors that the general public do. I tend to like a lot of things that the general public do. Even with all these years of exploring different sides of the show, the majority of the show I really haven't been rubbed the wrong way by on rewatch. I haven't suddenly turned into an elitist group of some sort. I haven't, had a change of heart really on a lot of things. And yeah, it's interesting because I would have expected this to happen by now. I would have expected to change and start to dislike things that I liked as a kid. But for the most part, that really hasn't happened. I'm quite comfortable in saying that I still enjoy the vast majority of aspects of the show that I still, that I liked as a kid. However, if there is one thing that really has gone down for me since I first viewed, and this is by far more than any other aspect of the show, than anything else, this is definitely the one that sticks out, and I think this is really, for me, the only big option that I can choose for an unpopular opinion, to be honest. And that is, I think that the Matt Smith era of Doctor Who is overrated. I don't necessarily think it's bad TV. I don't necessarily think it's all terrible. I don't think that's true at all. In fact, to a degree, I don't even think it's necessarily the worst era. I mean, if you've seen our Series 11 reviews, you can tell that I'm not too fond of Jodie's era so far, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Davison era either. However, the thing is, the Matt Smith era, in my experience, tends to be one that I find the general public really, really likes. And over time, it's the era of the show that I have really lost a lot of interest in, because I really loved it as a kid. When I was growing up watching Doctor Who, I really, really enjoyed the Matt Smith era when it was on. But on rewatch, I've just really lost my love for it big time. And yeah, that's my unpopular opinion is I do think it's quite overrated, and I will explain why. The first thing that I'm going to get into is the villains. I think that Stephen Moffat's handling of villains in the Matt Smith era tends to be quite flawed. The first one I'm going to begin with is the Daleks. I think in the Russell T Davies era, the Daleks are handled very well. I think they're pretty much perfect in the Eccleston Series 1. Like, they're pretty much, for me, the best they've ever been in Eccleston's series. And of course, I mean, Series 1's my favourite series of the show, so of course I'm going to love them then. And then in the Tennant era, whilst they're not as threatening as they are in Series 1, they are still really enjoyable characters, I find. I find the Daleks in the Tennant era to have a lot of character. They're very, 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 very funny. I think the scripts written around them are really good. And a lot of people would be sort of against that, especially in the regards to Daleks and Manhattan Evolution of the Daleks. But that's a whole nother kettle of fish. Adam and I quite like that two-part. I know a lot of people really don't, but I'm sure we'll get onto that at some point. But more importantly, overall, I really love the Daleks in the RTD era. I think they play a big role, and I think they're really treated with respect. Whereas in the Matt Smith era, I honestly think they're as bad as they ever are. In fact, I would say they're worse than they ever are in any other era. And that comes down to the fact that I just don't think that they're treated with respect. To be honest, I watched Matt Smith's Dalek stories recently. Specifically speaking, Victory and Asylum. They do make appearances elsewhere, cameos of sorts. You know, Wedding of River Song and Day of the Doctor and Time of the Doctor. And they're not exactly used that well in those stories. But more importantly, Victory and Asylum. The thing is, they don't really show them killing like they do before. They're very... how do I say it? They're very... it's almost like in the Matt Smith era, the Daleks aren't really the Daleks. They're more so a parody of the Daleks. And the way that they're characterized as a villain is very... it's just not taken seriously. And that is definitely illustrated in Victory of the Daleks, because the Daleks in Victory, right? The first half of the story shows sort of it's better. It's slightly better than the second half. It is devious, the Dalek that appears. It's the one that says, "Would you like some tea?" which is admittedly quite a funny line. It's very devious. However, that deviousness is surrounded by a lot of comedy, and it's hard to take the Daleks seriously when, like, it's really hard for me to explain, because in an episode like Doomsday, the Daleks are really, really funny, but they still feel threatening, and they still feel deadly, whereas the Dalek in Victory of the Daleks is funny, but it's not threatening. And I feel like that's the biggest problem. And of course that... And then the second half of that episode, you get the M&M Daleks, which they just look stupid, and I think that's more of a production issue. Stephen Moffat's taken blame for that. But really, like, they don't kill anyone. It's all just... It's a mess. It's a mess of a story. The Daleks are not treated with respect at all. And, like, Asylum of the Daleks is even worse. It's just, like... It's a piss-poor effort, like... Stephen Moffat just clearly didn't understand the Daleks as a concept. He even said that he doesn't like writing for them, which blows me away, because why the fuck would you write Daleks into your story if you don't want to? I mean, I guess there's the Terranation thing, but why didn't Moffat just give the Daleks to a different writer who wanted to write them? I guess maybe no one wanted to write them, which is really sad, because they're the show's most iconic villains, but in the Matt Smith era, they're just piss poor. They're really piss poor. And it sacrifices an opportunity that Matt Smith's Doctor could have had to interact with the Daleks the same way that Eccleston and Tennant did. and the classic Doctors too. And it's a shame. It's a shame that they're wasted. And of course, another iconic villain that's wasted in Matt Smith's era is the Cybermen. I think it may be even more so. And the reason why is because in episodes like The Pandorica opens and A Good Man Goes to War, they are literally just there for shock value. They're not actually used as villains. There really isn't much explanation as to why they're there. They're only there for, one, fan service, and two, because they want to use them as sort of like, in the same way that you'd use them in a haunted house ride. I don't think that's how you're supposed to use the Cybermen. The Cybermen are this... It's one of the best sci-fi concepts of all time, in my opinion. The Cybermen is this incredible idea, and in the Matt Smith era, they're really not used that well. Of course, in Closing Time, it's just so shit. Like, why are the Cybermen in a department store? Why is James Corden beating them with the power of love? It's just dumb. It's really, really dumb. I get the point is that he has emotion, but what about all those people in Rise of the Cybermen? Did they not have emotion when they were dying? It's dumb. Cybermen are supposed to be scary. They're not scary in the Matt Smith era at all. Nightmare in Silver introduces a new form of Cybermen, and it's just like the concept, like, it's for what it is, it's okay, like as its own. If it was not the Cybermen, if it was a different villain, it might be okay, because it's sort of like these fast robots, you know, coming to attack you. It's sort of this cool modern idea. The problem is the Cybermen is not supposed to be this sort of like RoboCop, Iron Man thing. The Cybermen are supposed to be these zombie-like creatures. They are humans that have evolved to the point where they're using technology to keep themselves alive. It is this scary, dark, horrible concept. And in the Matt Smith era, there is none of that. They are just there because the show says that they're iconic, and Moffat uses them for views, like to get people to watch the show, but doesn't use them well in the stories, and it's a shame. It's a real shame. And of course, those are the two sort of iconic villains that were wasted in the Matt Smith era. But what about a villain that is original in the Matt Smith era? Well, the one that usually comes to mind is the Silence, because the Silence are sort of the villain that encapture Matt Smith's era. They're brought up in his first episode and they're last seen in his final episode. The thing about the Silencers, as an idea, these creatures that you can't see, well, not that you can't see them, but when you look away from them and you forget them, that's a fucking brilliant idea. Stephen Moffat is a genius when he comes up with these ideas. And like, the whole tally on the arm thing is awesome. It's memorable. I was having a conversation with Adam and his parents the other night around a table, and we were talking about memorable villains. You know, they brought up the gas mask people from Empty Child. They brought up, you know, the Daleks, the Cybermen. They brought up all these great villains from the RTD era, and then his mum brings up the Silence, and it's like, we were surprised that she would remember, but actually, the Silence, these monsters, is such a great idea. But the problem is, in Series 6 especially, Moffat just does not write them very well, because the only great part to the Silence as a monster is the actual thrill and horror of them. But then when you actually look at the stories, they're not written well at all. Their plan makes no sense. It's never really explained properly. The entire era, the Silence is just a cock tease to get you to keep watching the show. It doesn't pay off. And there's so many flaws with them. Like, I think it's Impossible Astronaut, like, there's the scene in the bathroom, and the Silence, like, up to that point, the Silence is like this perfect idea. But the problem is, they show the Silence killing this lady with lightning, and it's like, okay, so they killed the lady. The problem is, any time that you see the Silence in a room with someone, it's like, why don't they just kill them? And it's like, if the Silence don't want to kill the Doctor, or they don't want to do anything, then the Doctor can just dance around them, fix a plot, like you see at the end of Day of the Moon. He does his magic wand bullshit that he always does. The Silence just stand there and let him do it. So where's the threat? Where's the danger? What did the Doctor have to overcome if the Silence weren't even really there to do anything to him dangerously? Which just makes it pointless. Really pointless. And, it just gets worse from there because they literally, after Day of the Moon, they literally go into the background and they're only used sparsely when they want to add a bit of tension to the story, like Wedding of River Song or Time of the Doctor. It's just dumb. It's really dumb. And the writing around some of those episodes, like Wedding of River Song, is just appalling. That finale is such a mess. It does not explain the Silence at all. Madame Kavarian, who claimed to be behind it all, we never actually get a proper explanation as to who she was. It almost reminds me of Snoke from The Last Jedi, but then again, that is a whole different universe, and to be honest, comparing the two is hard, but at the end of the day, I just really don't think the Silence paid off at all. And overall, the villains in the Matt Smith era are just such a letdown. And that's one of the big parts to why I think the era is overrated, because I think villains are so important to making or breaking an era. And that's why I think some of the best eras in Doctor Who have such great villains and great executed villains. And I just think that in the Matt Smith era, they're not horrible. They're not like catastrophically bad, but they're just misused, and it's a shame. And my second sort of point as to why I think the Matt Smith era is overrated is it's probably the most controversial part, because I know there's a lot of people that love this aspect of it, but for me, I think the actual writing of the companions is not very good. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean that I dislike Matt Smith's companions. I think that Amy and Rory are a very charming couple, and they're, as characters on their own, they make for a great time. Like, watching their arc from 11th Hour to Angels Take Manhattan is actually really enjoyable if you focus on them alone. Their love story, I think, is great. The problem is, in regards to Doctor Who as a show, I find as companions they don't really work. And the reason why is because I think their relationship with the Doctor is very weird, and that is only amplified by River Song, which is just this really forced in storyline that I've never liked. It's never sat right with me. I know a lot of people love River Song because of her personality. She's got this really witty, sarcastic Moffat girl personality, which Adam and I have said before, we're not big on the whole Moffat girl thing, but we know some people are. We know some people love the Moffat girl thing, and that's fine. But the problem is mainly not necessarily River Song's personality in regards to this, but it's just the way that she's crowbarred in to be Amy and Rory's daughter, and it's just like, I've never liked that. It just doesn't sit right with me. It's weird. It just adds this strange layer to the story, and in every subsequent episode where it's addressed, it just gets weirder and weirder, especially like episodes like Let's Kill Hitler and The Wedding of River Song just don't help. Like, in Series 6B, Amy and Rory, in A Good Man Goes to War, have just lost their daughter. And in Series 6B, they don't really bring it up. Like, you would think that Amy and Rory are catastrophically sad that they have just lost their baby, but they're not. It's never brought up. And I think that's a real plot hole, because Amy and Rory as characters, as parents, should care that they've just lost their baby, but I think the writing is just so messy that their characters are just not handled that way. And it's just like the focus in that series just doesn't work. It's bizarre. It's this weird whack Moffat mindset that doesn't actually consider what a real person would do. And it's sad because up to that point, Amy and Rory are very likable, and they, in terms of their personalities, they do continue to be likable to an extent. I do think Amy Pond at times can be quite irritating, but that's besides the point. to not actually consider what normal people would do in writing these characters can kind of be a bit off-putting for me, especially because the sort of idea of these new series companions is to try and make them relatable. And you could see Moffat was trying to make Amy and Rory relatable, but by not writing them like they're real people, deflates that. And it's a shame, because I have always had a fondness for Amy and Rory, even if I don't like them all the time, although to be fair, I've always loved Rory's personality. The writing around them is weird. And that continues the fact in episodes, even in Series 5, Series 5 is admittedly pretty good, but my least favourite part about Series 5 is the way that Moffat writes the Doctor, Amy and Rory as a love triangle, and it's really strange. Like, an episode like Amy's Choice, which I think is great, it's got a great concept to it, but like, there's a scene where it's like the Doctor and Rory are fighting for Amy's love or something, and it's just like, it's not that I necessarily think that that's a bad idea, because I'd be hypocritical to say that, because there are episodes like, Rise of the Cybermen, for example, where the 10th Doctor is stood between Mickey and Rose, and Mickey says to him something like, "Oh, of course you're going to pick Rose over me." There's episodes like, Bad Wolf or whatever, Bad Boomtown, where Captain Jack is between the Doctor and Rose. There's all sorts of tension, romantic storylines going on in the new series all the time. It's just that, for whatever reason, the one between the Doctor, Amy and Rory just doesn't sit right with me. It's awkward, it's weird, it's strange. It really takes away from me. It takes away from Matt Smith's Doctor. I always saw him as an old man trapped in a young man's body, and to see him actually, infatuated over Amy Pond is really strange. I've never really understood that. I've never really understood, like, why this Doctor would be set up to be infatuated by Amy Pond. Number one, because he's actually supposed to marry River Song for some reason, and two, I thought that, like, you can see in previous episodes, like, for example, in Flesh and Stone, when Amy Pond tries to hook up with the Doctor, he's very awkward about it, so for him to then go on to be attracted to her, like, in a romantic way, is strange. It's very strange. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I just don't know. I don't know, like, the writing around the Doctor, Amy and Rory is just weird. It's really weird. That being said, Karen Gill and Arthur Darvill, very charismatic, charming actors, especially Arthur Darvill. I love Arthur Darvill. His portrayal of Rory is just so good. I don't think the writing for Rory is particularly good from Moffat. Like, the fact that he just keeps dying, it's just a bit of a meme. But, like, Arthur Darvill just makes Rory what he is. He's just such a lovable character. But this is the problem. This is why I think Matt Smith's era gets a bit overrated. Because a lot of what carries it, I think, is the cast, the production, the music, all that stuff. All the really superficial stuff is really good in the Matt Smith era. But the problem is mainly to do with the writing for me. And a lot of people don't see that, because there's a lot of people out there. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. If you're one of those people, this is not a bad thing. If you enjoy this aspect of the show, then that's fantastic. But the problem for me, personally, is I can look past that surface level stuff, because I'm quite a deep Doctor Who viewer. And the problem is, the superficial stuff is not going to do everything for me. I need something deeper than that. And when I look past the superficial stuff, I look deep into the writing, I see so many flaws. It's weird, it's awkward, it's strange. Moffat's, attempt at doing Doctor-companion relationships, it's just flawed. It doesn't work for me. And it gets worse, because at least with Amy and Rory, they were quite likeable. But then we get to the likes of River Song and Clara, where I actually don't like them as characters. And with Clara, that point with Matt Smith and Clara, the fact that there's a romantic chemistry between them is just even worse for me. Like, there's a line in Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS where I think the Doctor says something along the lines of Clara's dress is a bit too tight. Like, this is going beyond what even Russell T Davies is doing with the Doctor. Because with Russell T Davies, he was making the Doctor romantic, but it's very compassionate, whereas Moffat is actually making the Doctor seem perverted, which is very strange. Very, very strange indeed. The romantic chemistry between Matt Smith and Clara, I never got why it had to be there. I guess it was to bait general public, because general public love romance in their stories. I know that because I know someone that watches Doctor Who purely for the romance, and more power to you if that's what you enjoy, but honestly, I just find that stuff so bizarre. I think the way that Moffat wrote Matt Smith with his companions was just like... It's always uncomfortable for me. Fun, definitely fun. There's a lot of fun to be had with Matt Smith and companions. It's very adventurous, very cute, especially with Matt Smith, Amy and Rory. It's a very cute TARDIS team, very likeable. But yeah, I just think the writing around the companions in the Matt Smith era is flawed, and it's just weird, very strange, very uncomfortable, and it just doesn't sit right with me at all. And of course, that leads me on to my third point, which is the story. Where do I begin with the story? So, Series 5 is admittedly quite good. Has a lot of good episodes in it. There's a reason why it's one of the most popular New Who series. I can completely understand why. I personally think that Series 5 is a little bit overrated, but not enough for me to dislike it. I actually do really like Series 5. But Series 6 and Series 7, I think, are actually quite poor. Now, I don't think that they're necessarily bad television per se. I mean, some of it I do think is. But I do think that by Doctor Who standards, Series 6 and Series 7 has some of the weakest writing in the history of the show, whether that be classic or New Who. I think a lot of the episodes in Series 6 and Series 7 are quite poor, such as Curse of the Black Spot, The Flesh Two-Parter, Let's Go Hitler, Night Terrors, Closing Time, Wedding of River Song, The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, Asylum of the Daleks, Dinosaurs in a Spaceship, The Power of Three. What else? Cold War's a bit mediocre. I've never liked Hyde. I know that's a popular one, but I've never liked Hyde. Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS is quite piss poor. Nightmare in Silver does not get the Cybermen very well. It's just... I just don't like it. Like, it's not horrible, but I just don't like it. And even... because those are the bad ones that I don't like. But even the ones that are good, that people really like, some of those ones, I just don't get why people say that they're all-time classics. I think a prime example with this would be to look at Series 5, because Series 5 is generally considered to be one of the best series. And there are certain stories in Series 5 that people consider to be all-time classics, like The Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone, and The Pandorica Opens, The Big Bang. Those two stories, to me, I like them, I enjoy them, but to say that they're all-time classics, I just don't agree. Because the main reason for me is, I mean, Pandorica Opens The Big Bang has another element to it that I'm not big on, and that's the fact that it's very messy. But that being said, it is very enjoyable to watch. And I think that's part of the problem is, a lot of people find Series 5 in particular to be very enjoyable to watch. It's very digestible, very funny, very witty. The charm's there, it's got a great tone to it. The characters are likable. It carries you through and entertains you. But I think the actual story itself is very thin, very lightweight. It doesn't actually do a lot. And yeah, the thing about Pandorica Opens The Big Bang is, especially The Big Bang, is that in comparison to the Russell T Davies finales, I don't think it actually has much of a story, because really, when you break it down, you take away all the fun elements of that story, what really is there left? The Doctor fucks around in a museum for a bit. There's jokes, there's humor, there's time travel. The universe is ending, but instead of actually feeling like there's threat, they're just running around having fun, which is okay. Then the Doctor goes into the Pandorica and blows up the TARDIS or something like that, which is never explained because it's supposed to be explained by the Silence arc, but that shit's never explained properly. So we never really got an explanation as to why the Big Bang even happened. And then Amy wishes that the Doctor comes back, and then he does. I know there's a lot more to that story than that, but to briefly sum it up, I just think that The Big Bang is an episode that people love mainly because it's great fun, but for us, people that actually break down sci-fi, break down Doctor Who, and look into the stories more deeply, I think for some of us, especially me, can see it for its lacking. And that's how a lot of the time I feel about Matt Smith's era in general. I think The Big Bang is a great one to tackle because that episode in particular is very popular. Another one that's very popular is A Good Man Goes to War. I have a lot of the similar opinions on A Good Man Goes to War that I do about The Big Bang. I think A Good Man Goes to War feels like the kind of episode that you would see on an American TV show. Something like maybe Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or one of those TV shows, like the really hypey stuff. Whereas A Good Man Goes to War, at the heart of it, doesn't really have a story. It's mainly just... It's an episode that revolves around the story arc of Series 6, and it uses a lot of sort of Hollywood-like elements to present big levels of hype to it. The Doctor, gathers together this team to fight these people in the injustice of Amy and Rory's daughter. It's a very superhero-like plot, and that just doesn't do that much for me. I would much rather an actual sci-fi story, and that just maybe just because it's not my cup of tea, but I think A Good Man Goes to War is a great example of why I don't think the Matt Smith era really captures what I think Doctor Who is supposed to be about. And you could compare that to Russell episodes like Doomsday or Journey's End, which admittedly they both similarly go for that sort of Hollywood blockbuster vibe, but the difference is, I think, under the surface of those episodes, there is this great emotional character story going behind it. And you could argue, yeah, well, what about Big Bang, Good Man Goes to War? The character story behind that as well, it's there. I think the difference is that, number one, the character story behind the Big Bang and A Good Man Goes to War, I don't think it's built up as well. I don't think it's delivered as well, and I don't think it's executed as well. And it's also... The Russell stuff really squeezes emotion out of you when you're watching it, whereas for me, it may just be because I don't connect with the Matt Smith era as much, but I just don't feel that same way about those episodes. I find that a lot of the emotional elements and the stuff like The Big Bang and A Good Man Goes to War, it's nowhere near as intense, nowhere near as thrilling, and a lot of it feels like forced emotion, stuff that's quite simple, as opposed to earned emotion. And I think that's a problem. Is I just think that the level in which that the Matt Smith era delivers a lot of its story points feels more forced than a lot of the stuff in other portions of Doctor Who. Because, and you might be saying to me, well, maybe it's just Russell over Moffat. The thing is, I actually think in the Capaldi era, Moffat actually goes ahead to squeeze way more intense emotion and gravitas into the writing. And it's interesting that he chose to do that with the Change of Doctor, but that just might be because of the different tone that he was going for with Capaldi's era. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that I think all of Capaldi's era is perfect, because it definitely isn't. There's plenty of episodes in Capaldi's era that I really don't like. But in terms of the actual story under the surface, there is definitely more of it in the Capaldi era, whether it be good or bad. And to tackle the other one that I mentioned, The Time of Angels, Flesh and Stone, the problem with that story is it is literally an exhibition for the Weeping Angels. It is a haunted house ride. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because I think that's really enjoyable to watch. It's quite scary. It's very thrilling to watch. It gets you through the 2 parts very easily. It's quite an accessible story. It's fun to watch. But like I said with the other episodes, there isn't really anything under the surface of that story. The character stuff between the Doctor and Amy is very light in that story, and that may be just because it's early in the series, but it's just like, in comparison to other Doctor Who, like I've said many times before, there's just not much there under the whole Weeping Angel thing. Apart from that, it's just so flat. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, I just find that a lot of the most popular stories in the Matt Smith era, the superficial elements and the surface level story is why I think they're popular, and I think they're overrated because they don't have enough depth to them, and I wish that they did. I wish they had more. And the last point I'm going to touch on, and I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to go really deep into this because there's other videos that will be more applicable, but I want to touch on Matt Smith's Doctor. And the one thing I think I will touch on in this video is, because it's an overrated, it's sort of me saying that the Smith era is overrated, and it's not necessarily to do with his Doctor. However, if there's one thing about his Doctor that I think is really overrated, for sure, is the fact that, unlike other Doctors, his Doctor relies more on gimmicks than any other. Now, other Doctors had gimmicks too, but I feel like Matt Smith tacked on so many gimmicks to his Doctor that it just became over the top and ridiculous. Like, that doesn't necessarily mean I think the gimmicks are bad, like things like the fez and the bow tie and all that shit. People love that. People, get that on t-shirts and tattoos and whatnot, and that's all good. The thing is, I just feel like it was unnecessary to have so many gimmicks, to have so many catchphrases, so many repeated jokes. Like, I think that it was a lot more natural when someone like David Tennant did it. David Tennant had his own gimmicks too, like L&Z, whatever. I just find that with Matt Smith, a lot of them felt very forced, such as Geronimo. I think the catchphrase Geronimo is really stupid. The fact that, Moffat's like, oh, well, David Tennant said L&Z, so now he has to say Geronimo, because, ho ho ho, so clever. I've never liked the Geronimo catchphrase. I think it's dumb. It's just not, it's not natural, because, for example, when David Tennant adapted the catchphrase L&Z, we'd had a whole series of them. It wasn't until Army of Ghosts that this happened, and it came about in a conversation between him and Rose Tyler, and it was one of those things where he was saying, oh, maybe I can meet someone called Alonzo, and I could say L&Z Alonzo. It was a joke that was put into the story, and then it became his catchphrase. It was a natural sort of introduction, whereas with Matt Smith, in his very first scene at the end of time, he's literally saying Geronimo already. There was no introduction to it. There was no, there was no dialogue that introduced this line. It's literally just tacked onto his Doctor. It's stuff like that, those gimmicks, that really frustrate me, because I think his Doctor could be so much more than that. And I'll get more into his Doctor later, in other videos. But basically, I'm not personally attacking someone who loves the Matt Smith era, because I can completely understand why. And I would know, because as a kid I loved it, and my opinions changed of it. But that doesn't mean that I've forgotten. I haven't forgotten how I felt when I first watched it. I think Matt Smith's era is great to introduce someone to the show, especially someone who's very young, because it's very fast-paced, very witty, very funny, very energetic. The production's great. The characters are very likable. It's very accessible, very fun. But I just think compared to other eras of Doctor Who, it doesn't have the depth, it doesn't have the strength of the writing, it's quite poor, it's rough around the edges, and it's just not very good overall. Even though some episodes in it are amazing, extraordinary episodes like Vincent and the Doctor, for example, I think is a masterpiece. There's other episodes that I love, like The God Complex, The Girl Who Waited, even The Day of the Doctor. My opinion of Day of the Doctor is lowered slightly since the first air, but I still love it. 11th Hour is a brilliant opener for his Doctor. And some of the ideas in episodes like Impossible Astronaut with The Silence is a fucking awesome idea. There's so many great things about the Matt Smith era. I just think overall it's overrated. And that's my unpopular opinion. Let me know what you think below in the comments. I'm not trying to force this on anyone. I just want to present my opinion. Same way that Adam did about Doomsday. I just wanted to start a discussion. This isn't me saying that I definitely think that this is shit or bad or anything. I'm just presenting my thoughts and opinions on what I've observed on rewatching the Matt Smith era. And I think that there is a lot that could have been done to improve what it was. And yeah, that's just what I think. Tell me what you think. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the advent calendar.